and welcome to ESL Revolution, everyone. I am your content creator and professor, Dr. B. Welcome back to the channel. Happy Sunday, everybody. That's right, it is Sunday here in South Korea. I hope you are all doing very, very well today. For my students, welcome back. I'm sure you're studying very hard for the upcoming final exams. Good luck on those. I'm sure you're going to do just fine. Just fine. I know you're studying hard. I understand that. For anybody out there who's with the channel and who's presently not a student, but perhaps a fellow educator or somebody just connected tangentially to the channel, thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for being watching this particular video, because this is the start of a new playlist, I guess, a new section of the channel, and it's going to be directed specifically to Edtech or education technology, and how that actually not only what is it, but how do we engage with it? How do we use it? What's my general setup? And also, it is a way of kind of documenting my own professional development for you. And so I'm not a huge EdTech person right now. I would say in the gaming lingo, I would say I'm kind of a noob at this. I have some awareness of it. I understand how to use the tools for the most part, or I can engage in online learning myself and learn those mechanisms. So that's not really a problem for me. What I'm struggling with in reality is the actual use of those and formulating my ideas to how to use them. So over the last few months, as I've been teaching online myself through Zoom and interacting with my students, I have in some ways been doing professional development. I've been sitting back and critically evaluating what works and what doesn't. What do the students enjoy doing, for example? And I've been gathering feedback from them over the semester to then be able to move forward in a way that allows me to get a better sense of how to move forward. So that's what this particular part of the channel is for. And I'm so glad you're here, because you can then come along this journey with me. I am not going to edit out the stuff that didn't do well, okay? If something didn't work for me, I'm going to let you know, because that in turn might help you save your precious teaching time and your time in preparing and dealing with all of this stuff. So I've given a little bit of an introduction to me before, but let me introduce myself again, just in case this is the first video that you are watching here. So I am a qualified teacher from Canada. I received my teacher's certificate in 2003, and I have been essentially teaching ever since. However, in 2005, I moved to South Korea, where because I quite frankly couldn't find work in Canada, and so I came to Korea, and I've been here ever since. Back in 2017, I was finally able to break into the university world. I had taught at the university before, but more in a part-time capacity. And back in 2017, in March, I was finally able to get that coveted university position, which I'd wanted to for a long time. But during that time, over the first 3 years of me teaching, I was really playing it safe. I did, and in part, I was doing that because I I didn't want to go outside the proverbial boundaries of what education is or is not at the university level. Obviously, I was doing all of the work that was required in terms of the textbook, in terms of the evaluations, that sort of thing. And going forward, that will not change. Okay, there are certain constants that I will maintain during that time of my teaching in the classroom. Whether that be online or offline doesn't matter. However, what I began to realize was that the way that I was engaging the students needed to change because, quite frankly, it did not fit a 21st century focus. I was still engaged in a style of education that, quite frankly, is 20 or 30 years old. Where it's a little bit more teacher focused. Yes, I was doing some student stuff. They were engaging material on their own. Yes, I was playing games and activities and doing all sorts of things. So that was present. But it was not, those were rules to the exception rather than the rule itself. And so back, and I've said this before in other videos, back around October of 2019, before COVID hit the world, I began realizing that something dramatic needed to change in my classroom. It wasn't that my student evaluations were bad or that I was a bad teacher. What I realized was that the manner in which I was engaging education needed to change. I needed to set myself up for some professional development, personally speaking, not necessarily going back to university, but engaging that world of new education to bring some of the best tools that others were using and popping those into my classroom. So that's what I've been doing for the last several months. Now, fast forward from October to January of 2020, COVID hits. February 2020, my school says schools are delayed by 2 weeks. Within that period of time, I realized online learning was going to be a thing. And so I got myself set up as quickly as I could to make sure that I was ready to go. And there was a lot of trial and error, not only in the hardware aspect of my teaching, but also in how I was going to manage that. Now, was it a perfect process? Absolutely not. But the thing that I made sure the students were aware of was that we were in it together. I was being thrown into a situation where, quite frankly, I was not prepared. The students were thrown into a situation where, quite frankly, they were not prepared either. So we were really in it together. And I so appreciate the patience of my students as I was going through this and trying a couple of new things from time to time. And that's what this particular series is now going to be about. It's going to be about not only the journey of the Edtech classroom in a broad sense, but also specific to what kind of new tech development can be seen within the classroom. What can I then do to use these things, and whether they work or not in a practical university setting. The second thing that this little kind of sub-series of my channel will be for is to document my own professional development, all of this. And I will try to be as self-critical as possible in terms of what is working and what isn't. And I'm sure, as I've got a couple of other teachers in the channel, they will be able to then provide that necessary feedback in the links below, in the comments below. I'm sure Eric will be more than excited to see all of this. Eric and I'm going to leave a link to his YouTube channel in my comments below. simply because he's been doing this for a little bit longer than I have, actually, and yet we are both streaming forward, no pun intended, quite deliberately in terms of our own our own personal professional development in the matter. You know, neither of us are going back to school for this, but there's so much information out there online that we can use that as a way of engaging and developing ourselves to engage and develop the students. So that's what I'm hoping will happen. So this first video, that was by way of a very long introduction, by the way, to all of this. That's about 10 minutes. So I apologize for rambling a little bit. But the real focus of this particular video is to go backwards a little bit before we move forwards. Now, what I mean by that is to talk about learning theory and to actually, this was interesting because as I was doing some general searches, I went through a couple of YouTube rabbit holes and came across another site that was dealing with this particular information, which then also was related to problem-based learning, which is something I've also talked about that I definitely want to use. And I did start using a little bit of that within the online classroom, but to be quite honest, it was difficult. I did not find the use of PBL as rewarding as I think it has been in the past in an actual brick and mortar setting when I was in the classroom. So what I need to be able to do then is understand how problem-based learning can then be used more effectively in an online format. Something I haven't quite figured out yet. Maybe you out there can help me with that. So, learning theories. Now, there are, of course, multiple different ways that people learn, right? If you type in into just a Google search and you type in learning styles, right? You've got so many different styles: auditory learning, visual learning, kinesthetic learning, amongst all of the others that are listed. Now, what I'm talking about is not those particularly, but the three main areas that have been used in educational psychology, and there might be more, but this is what I've come across. The three main educational styles in educational psychology. So there's three of them. There's behaviorism, there's cognitive information processing or cognitivism, and then finally constructivism. Now I'm going to link this website to the into my description below, so you can come and take a look at that. This is not my material, okay? I'm not creating any of this. I'm simply the conduit for you to have access to this. So let me first of all very quickly go through what each of these is. Okay, so behaviorism comes out of B.F. Skinner, and this is where in behaviorist theory how behaviors and changes in those behaviors are kind of guided through stimuli and response. So if I want to elicit a certain behavioral outcome in the classroom, I would use certain stimuli and certain responses, positive and negative reinforcement, etc., to navigate the student down to the directed outcome. Okay, so that's one. Cognitivism is the second one, and this is more the idea of information processing and how that leads to understanding and the retention of knowledge specifically. Okay? And the third one, constructivism, is how we as individuals construct knowledge on our own, and it is very much based on individual experiences. And so let me just go through a little bit these specifically. And I'm going to read from this, okay? I'm going to read from the website here because, you know, it will help you understand what I'm trying to get at. So behaviorism stems from the work of B.F. Skinner, I mentioned him before, and the concept of operant conditioning. Behaviorism theorists believe that knowledge exists independently and outside of people. They view the learner as a blank slate. We've heard this term for decades in education. Blank slate, tabula rasa, goes back to the 16th century. 16th century blank slate? No, blank slate is Enlightenment time. Sorry, that was a little bit before that. So within the Enlightenment, the blank slate, tabula rasa. Behaviorists believe that learning actually occurs when new behaviors or changes in behaviors are acquired through associations between stimuli and response. Thus, association leads to changes in behavior. Now, we've grown up with this type of learning style where the students come to their education as blank. They've perhaps never been engaged in this type of world before, and so we can kind of fill them up with new things. Okay? In the learning process specifically, behavioral theorists define learning simply as the acquisition of new behavior or a change of behavior. The theory that is that learning begins when a cue or a stimulus from the environment is presented and the learner reacts to the stimulus with some type of response. Consequences that reinforce the desired behavior are arranged to follow the desired behavior. Study for a test and get a good grade, for example, is one such desired outcome. Now, within this process, within behaviorism, examples of education style include drill work or rote learning, repetitive process or repetitive practicing, bonus points that provide initiative to do more work, participation points, which provide incentive for students to participate, verbal reinforcement, and establishing rules. All of those things are within the confines of this behaviorism style. Now, I would guarantee that all of you as teachers out there have used this in some way, shape, or form. I know I do. I still do, right? Just because it's old doesn't mean it's bad, and doesn't mean we need to throw everything out because it's an old style of education. In fact, there are certain ways that this might still be useful, okay? For example, there's nothing wrong with saying good job to a student because they've done a good job on something, right? There's nothing wrong with that. We wouldn't be silent if a student is doing a great job and we want to acknowledge the fact that they've worked well, right? There's nothing wrong with that. There's also nothing wrong with establishing rules in the classroom. In fact, if we don't, we are going to, I think, and in my own practice for 17 years of teaching, I can assure you that not having those rules in a classroom can ultimately lead to some disastrous classroom failures. So there's nothing wrong with having those guidelines and those rules that allow for behavior to exist within a particular confine. I have no problems with that. In fact, if you've got anything below to contradict me on that, that's great. Put a comment below. I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say about that. However, that being said, behaviorism instruction does not prepare the learner for problem solving and critical thinking. Now, this is where, within the confines of the South Korean system that I'm in and I've been in for a long time now, this is actually what has been the predominant focus of South Korean learning. Memorization, rote learning, preparing for exams, right? Now, why is that? Well, fundamentally, Korea has always worked on this kind of system. And it stems from the Confucius philosophical underpinnings that gird the entire country. The entire mindset is based on this. Even if people don't understand that that's where it's coming from, this is where it stems from. The biggest example of this is the fact that essentially students spend 12 to 15 years preparing for the KSAT. And that KSAT, the Korea Scholastic Aptitude Test, is the modern incarnation of the Confucius state exam that was given to people 400 years ago. Okay, it's the same format. It's the same, because when you take that test, you can prove yourself worthy to state employment or to other things. Okay, so the whole system functions in this operant conditioning, this behaviorism model of education. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? Well, yes and no, because of the problem that it elicits. The idea that there is really no problem solving or creative learning going on. And that is a problem. I can see that, and I've seen that for well over a decade of me teaching here at all levels, middle school, elementary school, high school, university. I do see that. And even at university, I still see that, this kind of memorizing approach. Now, I will admit that I'm also at fault for that, because I have been engaged in that type of learning. Why? Because I want my students to memorize certain things. Now, I'm doing it not perhaps within the behaviorism model, but let's say if I want them to prepare for their individual presentation, I want them to memorize that script. Why? Because it opens up other abilities for them to have during that presentation. All right, so there are reasons why I do that, but still I might be falling within this model a little bit too heavily. Learners do what they're told and do not take initiative to change or improve things. Now, this is another thing where the behaviorism model can actually stifle student growth, perhaps in a way that will be detrimental to the 21st century learning and learning model that we're trying to get at. The learner is only prepared for basic facts, automatic responses, and performing tasks. This, I can assure you, is the case. If I ask a question on the exam that they've not studied for, they don't know how to process that, because it's not something. So if I give a follow-up question that is within the same confines of the question, most of the time the students don't really know how to handle that, and I often just move on because they're not able to deal with that. Okay, cognitivism. This is the second model that I talked about. Cognitive information processing is based on the thought process behind behavior. The theory is based on the idea that humans process the information they receive rather than merely responding to stimuli, i.e. they think about what is happening. Cognitive information processing is learned when the learner plays an active role in seeking ways to understand and process information that they receive, and it relates to what is already known within stored memory. And this goes back to the theories credited to Jean Piaget, famous psychologist and educational psychologist / educational philosopher. Now, I know for sure that I use this in the classroom because what I do is there are times when I give students information that I have not referred to and not taught, but I want them to struggle with within perhaps a team environment and give them the chance to work through some of that information where they can in fact use existing or pre-existing knowledge to help them guide that process, and that leads to some interesting results. So in the learning classroom, things like classifying or chunking information, associating the new concept with something that they've already known. It provides a structure in terms of how I might organize the classroom into efficient ways. It does use real-world examples. It involves discussion and problem solving, the use of analogy and other things. So this is certainly one step up, and it does help within the classroom. And I would imagine myself right now as a teacher being more in this capacity rather than behaviorism. Yes, there are some things in behaviorism that I use, but certainly in terms of CIP or cognitive information processing, I would say this is where I land more often than not in my own way of education. However, what I am striving for, what I'm trying to develop, is the idea of constructivism more in my class. Let's talk about that for a minute. Constructivism is based on the premise that we all construct our own perspectives of the world based on individual experience and internal knowledge. Okay, there's that internal knowledge. So that then borrows a little bit from the cognitive approach. Learning is based on how the individual interprets and creates the meaning of their experience. Knowledge is constructed by the learner since everyone has a different set of experiences and perceptions, learning is unique and different for each person. So if I give problem A to a team, there are going to be multiple ways that the students interpret and understand that knowledge because each one is coming from a varied, from various background perspectives. Constructivism believes that learning is a process where individuals construct new ideas or concepts based on prior knowledge and experience. So how can we use this? Well, we use case study, research problems, problem-based learning, which I'm a big proponent of, brainstorming, collaborative learning, group work, discovery, simulations. So those, as I'm going through this process of my own professional development, I can see behaviorism less likely to be impacted in my classroom. I can see cognitivism playing more a role, and yet now what I'm doing is wanting to develop the constructivism within the framework of my classroom. And I've been struggling how to do that within the online, and I found myself going back a little bit in my own online classrooms, perhaps not utilizing the constructivism as much, but in part I think because I'm not adept yet at using it. And I think I need that classroom experience in order to go through some of this stuff in a real world situation, and then can begin modeling that into the online environment. Now I know that there's lots of educators out there, some of whom I've subscribed to, that say that these models do in fact work well, but I want to work through a little bit of that more before I open it up into an online world. All three strategies are important to understand. When deciding which strategies to use, it's important to understand the level of knowledge of the learners, the thought processing demands, and the desired outcomes. So those are three things that, moving forward, those are things that I, as a teacher, would need to be aware of. Okay. Now this video so far is 30 minutes long. Now, what I want to do in the next video is actually go through these three things again and relate them to Edtech specifically, and how educational technology, whether physical hardware or software, can then move our students into new realms of learning within the EFL learning environment. So stay tuned, everybody, because we are coming up. Anyway, thank you very much. This video will be posted out on Wednesday, which is my daily drop, or my weekly drop for videos. So I do hope that you comment below. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say on the matter. And so, yeah, there we go. There's our first 30 minutes. Edtech, it's on its way. Let's get with these theories first, and then we'll move into the actual tech review that I'm doing for my classrooms in the next semester and in the near future. Stay tuned, everyone. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button. We will be right back with Edtech for you in the classroom. Have a great weekend. See you later, everybody. Peace. Take care. Be the revolution.